son, Won Sohn of the CSU-Channel Islands has joined us once again to give us his economic overview for the coming year. Dr. Sohn is director of the Institute of Global Economic Research at Cal State University Channel Islands in Camarillo, where he holds the Martin B. Smith Professorship in Economics. He is the vice chairman of the board for Forever 21 and is member board of directors for Western Alliance Bancorp and Torrey Pines Bank. Additionally, he's the commissioner at the Port of Los Angeles. Earlier in his career, he was president and CEO of Hanmi Financial Bancorp. He was the chief economic officer for Wells Fargo, a senior economist for the President's Council of Economic Advisors, where he was responsible for economic and legislative matters pertaining to the Federal Reserve and financial markets. The Wall Street Journal has recognized Dr. Sohn as one of the best economic forecasters in the nation, and we are very pleased that he is here to join us today. Would you please give a good welcome to Dr. Sohn.
This morning, you expect me to talk about the economic outlook for 2014, right? But I was going to do that, but the outlook is not very good. So instead, I'm going to talk about something even more exciting. As you know, I'm vice chairman of a company called the Forever 21, and I consider myself an expert in latest fashion. So that's what I'm talking about this morning. So speaking of the fashion, well, we'll talk about that later. But first, let's talk about the economic situation. Today, I'm going to talk about not so much about really the local economic situation, but what's happening around the globe. And I will also focus on investment implications about the stock market. I do not usually do that, but right now it's a very good time to do that because so much depends on what happens in the stock market. When we look at the last 3 years since the Lehman crisis in 2007 and 8, economic growth has been, I guess the best way to put it is subpar. We've had very low inflation. I remember when I was going around the country giving speeches for Wells Fargo, we should talk about inflation. Inflation is our number one enemy, cancer in our society. How do we get the inflation rate down to zero? Now we are saying, inflation, where are you? Come back. We love you, see? And so inflation is very low. We are concerned about inflation, not only in the United States, but elsewhere around the world. As a result, as you know, the Federal Reserve, chaired by Chairman Bernanke, they instituted 3 rounds of so-called quantitative easing. First, you cut the interest rate down to zero, so then what else do you do? Well, you increase liquidity in the economy, and that is called quantitative easing by buying government bonds and mortgage-backed securities. As you recall, the first round was really designed to stabilize the banking system. The second round was designed to beat deflation. Now the third round that we're in right now is really designed to create jobs by boosting housing. So here we are in January of 2014. So how will the economy do in the United States and elsewhere? How about the stock market? Will the stock market continue to do well? How about the bond market? Is that a good place to get in 2014? So let's talk about some of these issues. First of all, if you look at the U.S. economy, you know, U.S. economy actually is ahead of many other countries in Asia and Europe. What I mean is that we really went through the troubles and difficulties ahead of a lot of other nations, which means that we've been able to correct our problems first. Let's look at our balance sheets. Your balance sheet and my balance sheet, the consumers. We are paying down a lot of debt, so we're not as leveraged as we were. How about the businesses? Businesses are loaded with liquidity. In fact, many of them, they don't know what to do with it. And a lot of that money is parked overseas. How about the government? Even the federal government, you know, they've got a lot of debt, but they are making slow and painful progress, but progress nevertheless. The fact that we have a good balance sheet, that puts it in a good position to really move forward. I think that's very important. Clearly, the fact that the housing has improved, and the fact that interest rates have been very low, These are some of the reasons why we've been able to deleverage, improve our balance sheet. And that is a very good foundation that we have. We can't say the same thing about Europe. France, Italy, Greece, as you know, those countries are having difficulties. In recent weeks, in recent days, as a matter of fact, there have been many articles in the Financial Times and Wall Street Journal about the debt problems in China. Well, today, I'm not going to talk too much about China, but again, the point is that they've got a lot more debt. Well, in the United States, we are in a much better position. We have a stronger balance sheet than we have in the past. Economists also talk about so-called fiscal drag. Now, what if the devil is fiscal drag? That simply means when Uncle Sam raises your taxes, that means we cannot spend as much. So that is known as fiscal drag. As you recall, about a year ago, I remember when I came here to talk to you about that, the federal government, they decided to raise taxes, including our payroll taxes, and we are talking about what impact that could have on the U.S. economy. Well, to make a long story short, in 2013, it shaved about 1.75 percentage points from economic growth in 2013. That's right. If it weren't for those tax hikes that we had in 2013, we would have had economic growth. Well, by about 1.75 percentage point higher than we actually had in 2013. That's quite a bit. To be sure, in 2014, we will have fiscal drag. Taxes are going up, as you know, but it will be only 0.5% drag. So the differential is not as large as it used to be. Therefore, I think that's a positive. We're getting less of a drag, even though it is still a drag from the federal government. Another good news is, of course, energy. And later on, I'm going to talk about this in greater detail. We all know America is becoming energy dependent. Prices are going down. And when prices go down, that is like a tax cut. Low cost of energy, gasoline, natural gas, and etc. That is like a tax cut. But as I said, I'll talk about more in a minute. But economic forecasting actually is not that difficult if you know what you and I, the consumers, will or will not do. Because we account for about 70% of economic growth. We get excited, start spending money, open up our wallets, the economy does well. If we get cautious, get upset, and not spend the money, the economy goes down into a drain. And what about in 2014? Well, I'm hoping that we are going to be more optimistic about the economy and open up our wallets more than we have in the past. Why? First of all, we are getting more jobs. Not very rapidly, but if you look at the monthly economic reports, we are getting more jobs. Also, would you believe wages are going up? That's right. As the labor market becomes tighter, as the economy needs more skilled labor, we are becoming, well, getting better paid and wages are going up. There's also something called the wealth effect. Stock market is much higher than it was in the past. And also house prices are going up. And when these prices go up, our wealth goes up. As a matter of fact, if you look at the data from the Federal Reserve Board, which tracks our net worth, our net worth has exceeded the previous peak in 2007. So we are much better off than we have been in the past. So how does that affect your spending behavior? When I was the chief economist at Wells Fargo, one of the studies I did was so-called the impact of wealth effect on consumption. And to make, again, long story short, our conclusion was that if your wealth goes up by about $100, could be due to the stock market or house price increases, you increase your spending by about 4% over a 2-year period. That's right. So if your wealth goes up because of the increase in the stock market or house prices, you increase your spending by about $4 over a period of 2 years. And that is pretty powerful, yeah, because prices of stocks and houses have gone up quite a bit. Low inflation. Even though we are saying inflation, why come back? We love you. And but the fact that when inflation is low, that means our buying power is higher. And that is good. The biggest negative about consumption is, of course, uncertainties. When you talk about uncertainties, it affects both consumers as well as businesses. And the biggest source of uncertainty that we have in the economy right now is, of course, Washington. Now, hopefully right now, they seem to be cooperating more, and maybe hopefully they'll get things done, but who knows? There might be more fireworks and uncertainties down the road, and that has and could be a major source of negative for the consumption. But in 2014, I'm hoping that you and I will spend more than we have in 2013. How about investments, capital spending, plant equipment, software, etc.? Well, when the economy goes up, businesses obviously they have to be prepared. They need to increase their capacity. They end up spending more to build the capacity in terms of plant equipment and software, especially because they need the productivity gains. Today, every business wants to win. They want to be productive. They want to beat the competition. The economy, not only in the United States, but especially globally, we're not growing all that rapidly. The name of the game is really market share. The pie is not growing, so how do you do better? Get a bigger market share. And one of the best ways to get bigger market share is raising productivity. And to raise productivity, we are seeing more and more businesses buying equipment and software, for example. And hopefully, that will be a positive. But again, as I said, uncertainty is a very, very negative factor for not only consumers, but also for businesses. If you think Washington, they are going to screw things up. It will slow economic growth. You can't really tell what's going to happen to our future. You are not going to be building capacity. You are not going to be hiring people. And so that is a major source of uncertainty, and of course, that's something that we cannot predict. How much uncertainty will be spewing out of Washington in 2014. The other area which is a positive for the economy, as we all know, is housing. We all know about housing, the things that we're doing better, therefore I'm not going to be spending a whole lot of time, but let me just make some of the key points. First of all, as I mentioned, the economy is continuing to grow, and that is good. Interest rates are important. Many things are important, but the most important item for housing is jobs. If we have more jobs, you can be sure that we will buy more houses. One of the reasons why the housing has been recovering so far is not only because of low interest rates, but also because we've been creating more jobs. Not rapidly, but we've been creating jobs. That's very important. There's also a tremendous amount of pent-up demand. We have not been building a lot of houses. Since 2007, we've been seeing more and more households being formed. The people are getting married, and young people, they need homes, but they cannot afford houses. What have they been doing? They did so-called doubling up. They move into their parents' houses, and they stay there. And for first couple of weeks, they're welcome, but after that, the parents get sick and tired of you, and they want you to move out. But you do not have the money, and you can't afford to buy a house. See? As a matter of fact, there aren't houses to be bought. Why? Because we've not built that many homes. See? And then so those are the situations that we are in. There's a tremendous amount of pent-up demand, and that is one of the reasons why we will see, hopefully, continuing positives coming out of the housing sector. In summary, what I'm saying is that when you look at the U.S. economy, I'm saying that in 2013, the economy grew about 1.7%. We don't have all the data yet, so we can't tell right now precisely how rapidly we grew in 2013, but my guess is that about 1.7%. And 2014, hopefully it will be about someplace between 2.5% to 3%. And if that's the case, that is a pretty good position to be in. When you look at 2014, but also there will be a lot of headwinds. Now, what kind of headwinds could we possibly expect? Well, the Federal Reserve in 2012 and 13, so-called quantitative easing, low interest rates have really helped the economy. But in 2014, they have already begun, as you know, so-called tapering that has been pushing up the long-term interest rate and will probably continue to do so. Even though they said that they are going to keep short-term rates stable until 2015, sometime in 2015. Now, the reason they keep emphasizing low short-term interest rates through 2015 is what economists call the term structure of interest rates. I don't want to get too technical here, but the idea being that long-term interest rate is really a combination, a weighted average of a series of short-term interest rates. So if Chairman Bernanke, now Chairwoman Yellen, if they say that, look, you do not have to worry about short rates going up because we're going to keep it low for an extended period, well into 2015. And the idea is that, well, that is going to hold down long-term interest rates, including mortgage rates as well. Well, despite that, we've been seeing long-term interest rates going up. But so clearly, reduction of stimulus in 2014, that will be a headwind. As I mentioned, again, uncertainty coming out of Washington. That could be another source of uncertainty and headwind. Even though they did agree on a budget package, but come February, March and April, once again they're going to be talking about the debt ceiling. Will they be able to compromise, or will they have some very unpleasant consequences out of that? We don't know. So that is a source of uncertainty. From overseas, today we are living in an increasingly globally dependent economy. The Middle East, North Korea maybe earthquakes, tsunami, who knows what's going to happen overseas. Every year you can be sure that we will have some unpleasant things happening overseas. And that tends to depress economic growth, so that we should be prepared for that. I can go on and on and on and talk about some of the headwinds and uncertainties, but again, you can see we will have some of these in 2014, and we should be prepared for that. What I'm saying is that when you look at the global economic situation, you know, a couple of years ago, we used to say the place to be is really emerging markets, especially so-called the BRICS, right? They were the superstars, but today they're not anymore. In fact, Brazil, India, Indonesia, even Russia, they are suffering. They're not doing very well. And there are a number of reasons for that, because in many of these countries, they depend heavily on commodities, such as Canada, Russia, Indonesia. They depend on oil and also other commodities. And the demand for commodities are not all that strong. Why? Because economic growth in China is slowing. China has been a major source of demand for these commodities. Yeah, these are called the commodity countries, as I mentioned, Canada, Australia, Brazil, and Indonesia, etc. So economic slowdown in China, that is having a major impact on so-called the BRIC countries, emerging market nations. And the other reason is, again, quantitative easing, and then now followed by tapering. When we were engaged in quantitative easing, we still are, but the Federal Reserve was pumping out money. Interest rates were very low. Many Americans have decided that, you know what, I cannot get decent interest rates. I'm going overseas. They went to Korea, they went to Japan, not Japan, but they went to China, they went to Australia, they went to Brazil and elsewhere. Well, it was kind of like a tide going into those countries with the expectation of tapering and the eventual ending of quantitative easing. People are saying, you know what, the water is coming out, see, the tide is going out. Therefore, I want to make sure that I get ahead of that. We are seeing money coming out of India. We are seeing money coming out of China and Brazil, and etc. Those countries are suffering. And so that's why, as I said, emerging market nations, especially the BRIC countries, they are really not the best place to be. In fact, people are trying to get out of those countries, and so that's why the financial markets in those countries, they are suffering. Their currencies are depreciating, and in fact, countries like India, they have a problem covering their current account deficits. I say really the best place to be is now not in developing nations or emerging market nations, but developed nations, such as the United States and Europe and Japan. Again, when you talk about the United States, I gave you a reasonably optimistic view. When you look at Europe, they've been at the bottom, at least for quite some time, but they are beginning to do better. Hopefully the recession is over. No one is talking about healthy, strong economic growth in Europe, but they are going to be hopefully doing better in 2014. Japan, because of the so-called the Abe economics, well, they seem to be coming out of the trough, and they are beginning to do better as well. So what I'm saying is that when you look at the U.S. stock market and, in fact, the global stock market, I would say still really the best place to be is in the United States. And you say, yeah, but don't we have a bubble in the stock market? Well, let's talk about the U.S. stock market and then what I think will happen in 2014. In fact, not just the stock market, but let's talk about the financial markets. Broadly speaking, we can divide the financial markets into two categories, right? The bond market and the stock market. I used to be on the investment committee at Wells Fargo, and we used to manage hundreds of billions of dollars. And basically, you talk about so-called the asset allocation first. That's really the first step. In the stock market, there are really the three key things that you want to worry about. Number one is the asset allocation. That is a composition between stocks, bonds, and cash. The second is, of course, the stock picking. And then the third one is market timing. To make, I guess, long story short, we all know no one, not you, not me, we're not very good at market timing. Stock picking, well, some people think they are, but by and large, we're not very good at that. And the studies have shown that really, about 70 to 80% of the winners and what separates the winners from the losers is really so-called the asset allocation. How do you get the composition right? Stocks, bonds, and cash. So when you talk about stocks and bonds and cash, well, today we talk about the bonds and the stock market. When you look at the bond market, the answer is actually reasonably clear. Now, I'm kind of generalizing there, as you know, many different types of bonds, from floating rate bonds to municipal bonds to the junk bonds and many other kinds of bonds. But to make it simple, when we talk about tapering, economy improving, you are talking about high interest rates. When interest rates go up, there is a mathematical relationship between price and interest rate. When interest rates go up, price of bonds go down. When interest rates go down, the price of bonds go down, right? So in 2014, we are saying that interest rates are headed up. Then mathematically, the price of bonds has to go down. That means, again, there are some exceptions. The bond market is not a very good place to be. You are going to be losing money. And that is not to say that you should not have bonds in your portfolio, but maybe if you have some cash laying around, it might be a good time to buy bonds, but clearly the bond market is a place to be very cautious about, careful about. Now let me move on to the stock market. The stock market has done far better than anyone anticipated. The question is, what about in 2014? Well, what's important variable for the stock market is really the economy, and as I said, economy will do slightly better. How about monetary policy? Well, monetary policy is going to be a key determinant of the stock market in 2014. When you talk about why did the stock market do so well in 2014, there are many reasons, but the most important reason really was monetary policy. When the Federal Reserve, they create money, they increase liquidity in the economy. Some of that money has to go to the stock market, and that's why the stock market went up. I've been in this business for a long time, and I've been talking about the stock market for a long time. I've been right, I've been wrong, but I know something about the stock market. But if I had learned one thing about the stock market in the last 30 years, I can tell you this. If you want to really gauge the direction of the stock market, follow monetary policy. That will influence 80% of the game. That's my experience. You can talk about asset allocation, you can talk about a lot of other things. But again, if you can follow monetary policy, that will determine roughly 80% of the overall direction of the stock market. But fortunately, in 2014, even though we have tapering, right? But again, let's not forget the fact that tapering means reducing stimulus, not tightening. Still, we will see more liquidity coming into the economy from the central bank, and that will be positive for the stock market. The other one is, of course, so-called evaluation. People say, is the stock market over or undervalued? Well, you know about Professor Schiller's, hopefully you do, about so-called a CAPE, right? Cyclically adjusted price earnings ratio. I don't want to get into the technical details, but it's called a CAPE. CAP, according to Professor Schiller of Yale University. Well, according to that yardstick, which a lot of people use, the stock market is a bit, maybe some people say quite a bit, overvalued. What do you think? It's a bit overvalued or quite a bit overvalued? I think that most people agree that today the stock market is overvalued. Does that mean that we will see the stock market going down in 2014? Not necessarily. The stock market always overreacts in both directions, on the upside as well as on the downside. As long as central bank, they are creating liquidity, they are pumping more money into the economy, you can be sure that the market will continue to overreact and overvalue. So simply because it is overvalued today does not mean that the market has to go down. It always overreacts, as I said. When you look at the stock market in 2014, there are some obviously positives and negatives, and let me just mention some of them. As I mentioned, the economy is growing more rapidly than is positive. But again, when you talk about the economy growing at 2.5%, that is not the most exciting economic growth. It's nothing to write home about, even though it is growing faster. So that's both positive and negative. The other negative is, as I mentioned, that I didn't mention it, but the other negative is margins. Eventually, stock prices depend on two things: margins and the volume, right? The volume depends on how rapidly the economy grows, and the margins that depends on how rapidly your cost goes up, your productivity. If the economy is growing at a slow rate, your volume is going to go up, but it is going up at a slow rate. What about the margin? Well, so far, the American businesses have been enjoying very, very healthy, high margins. Why? Because labor costs have been held down. But now, as I mentioned, the labor costs are beginning to rise, and that is going to eat into margins. So margins have really been held at very high levels, primarily because of labor costs being held down. But in the future, that is not going to be the case. So we might see some margin erosion. So again, that might be one of the negatives that we have. On the other hand, when you talk about the stock market, before you have a major correction, you do have some minor corrections here and there. And we really have not had any meaningful correction in the stock market. And so when you see a number of meaningful minor corrections in the stock market, generally that is a good leading indicator of what's going to happen to the stock market. We have not had that. So I think right now we are safe on that score. One positive that I see in the stock market is the amount of cash that we have. If you look at the money market funds, including money market mutual funds and the amount of money at banks, we are just flooded with liquidity. There's so much money floating out there. And so there's a record amount of cash out there, and then that's a reservoir. And some of that money is going to go into the stock market, so that is good for the stock market. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the Federal Reserve, that is really 80% of the game in the long run. Even though they are talking about tapering, tapering means reduction of a stimulus, not tightening. So I think it's important to remember that. Starting February 1st, we will have a new chairperson, Janet Yellen, and I happen to know her, and actually I know her husband much better. When I was at Stat Economies in the White House, my next door neighbor was Janet Yellen's husband, and so if I had known that she was going to be the chairperson of the Federal Reserve, I should have gotten to know her better, but I did not. And so that, again, I think she will do an excellent job, and she's a good economist, and so we're all looking forward to having her as a chairperson at the Federal Reserve. But the point is that she has a reputation of being more dovish, and so a lot of people are saying that when she's at the helm, she will be beginning February 1st, well, she's going to make sure that the economy is probably more liquid than you would be elsewhere. So that is kind of the U.S. stock market in the short run in 2014. At this point, let me just go a little bit beyond that. What about the future? When you make investments in the stock market, at least I make investments in the long run, not just in the short run, not in just 2014. I tend to, buy good stocks and then hang on to them. I tend to agree with the Warren Buffett, see? And if you look at Warren Buffett's, his philosophy actually is very simple. He buys good stocks and hangs out there for a long time. And again, if you quote Mr. Buffett, you know what he said, right? He said, I don't sell stocks. Why? Because, well, let's assume that you have $100. If you sell those stocks because you got some profits and then give Uncle Sam 30%, 40%, you've got maybe $65 left. And then you reinvest that $65 and then you might grow some. But if you hadn't sold those $100 and paid those taxes, you would have that $100 to work with, right? So if you compare the two situations, one situation, you have your $100 and then you keep growing that, and then you sell those stocks and go into some other stocks and you try to go to $65. In the long run, simply using the power of compounding, there's no question that you're going to be better off by simply keeping that $100 and then growing for 10, 20, 30 years. And that's really the part of the secret of what Mr. Buffett has done. And then so I'm one of those advocates of buying good stocks and then keeping them for a long time. But again, let me come back to the United States. I am definitely biased, not only because I'm an American, I live here, and again, I happen to think that the United States is really the best place to invest. And let me tell you some of the reasons why. Here I'm talking about not 2014, but really the long term. What are some of the economic advantages America has over BRIC nations and Europe and elsewhere? Well, when you look at any economy, and its economic potential in the long run, the size does matter. When you have a size, like the United States we do, we have opportunities for economies of scale. You have opportunities for diversification. If you are investing in New Zealand, a country so small, you cannot diversify, see? And you cannot really have economies of scale. But in the United States, we are so big, we are the biggest nation in the world, therefore we have those opportunities. Not only that, in a big country like the United States, we've got a lot of natural resources. Let's talk about the arable land. Did you know that? We have 5 times the arable land China has. If you look at the water resources, which is now important, we have 4.5 times more water resources than China does, for example. Size does matter. The second reason is energy. As I mentioned earlier, in 2014, hopefully the price of energy will go down. But this is also a big, big positive for the United States in the long run. We know how important energy is. There's nothing which does not use energy, either as an energy source or as a feedstock. United States now, we are the largest energy producer, beating Saudi Arabia and Russia. That's right. We are the largest energy producer. And that has many, many advantages. First of all, we don't have to import much oil at all from the politically volatile Middle East, and that is good. It reduces uncertainty, see? And also, it gives us a tremendous cost advantage. Let's talk about natural gas. In the United States, for example, to buy 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas, today it costs us slightly below $4. If you go to Japan, that is about $17. If you go to Europe, it is about $18. Now, when you are manufacturing something, when you are using natural gas, in the United States, we are paying $4. If you go to Japan, if you go to Europe, they are paying $17. You see the tremendous cost advantage that we have, and that is very, very good. It also helps our balance of trade, the balance of payments, and also it helps employment. And these are some of the advantages that we have. And I'm saying that these are the advantages that we enjoy not only in 2014, but also many, many years to come. Manufacturing, that is also coming back. A lot of people thought American manufacturing is dead. Well, it's not dead. It is coming back. One of the reasons why manufacturing is coming back is because this is a good place to manufacture. Technology that is helping. Many jobs went to China and elsewhere because what? It required a repetitive, mundane labor, right? And today, technology can take care of that, see? And a lot of those jobs are coming back to America. In fact, if you go to Dartmouth University in New Hampshire, one of the Ivy League schools, they used to manufacture their jerseys and t-shirts and hats and baseball caps and etc. from China, made in China. Well, recently they decided to manufacture them in Boston, Massachusetts. You say, what? Boston, Massachusetts? That's right. There's a company called Boathouse Sports. Go into the internet and look up Boathouse Sports. They manufacture those things for now Dartmouth College. Why? Because again, much of the work is done by machines. Not only cutting, even sewing, but also folding. You know, when you have those t-shirts, they have to be folded, right? Used to be done by hand. Today, the machines, they do that. They can do it much faster, cheaper. They're doing that at Boathouse Sports in Boston. Cost is slightly higher, but you don't have to worry about long lead time. And again, the fashion changes, and therefore you can respond to fashion much more rapidly. Manufacturing that is coming back. Manufacturing that is coming back by American companies and by foreign companies. American companies such as GE. In fact, in Kentucky, GE, they have a manufacturing operation, and they are manufacturing home appliances like water heaters and dryers and etc. Not only GE, but also General Motors and Caterpillar, they are bringing manufacturing back to the United States. Also foreign companies such as Michelin, they are building plants in South Carolina. Chinese computer manufacturer Lenovo, they are building plants in the United States. Well, more and more foreign companies are bringing back not only low-tech, but also high-tech manufacturing to the United States as well. And so these are sources of good jobs and then more jobs in the United States. When you talk about these jobs in manufacturing, we're not talking about a lot of jobs because they are obviously related to technology. But again, they are coming back. We have reached the bottom in manufacturing job losses. In the future, it'll be going back up. Let me continue on with why I am optimistic about America in the future, in the long run. And I would ask you to actually invest in America rather than elsewhere. And here's one more reason, what I call institutional advantages. How easy is it to do business? You know, we complain and moan and groan about the regulation in Washington. That is all true. We have too many regulations that we should not stand for that. We should tell our politicians to cut regulations, reduce regulations, and eliminate regulations, and etc. But comparatively, we are far better off. World Bank, they publish what is known as the Ease of Doing Business Index. And when you talk about the ease of doing business in America in terms of the permits, for example, and again, the rule of law, there's no question that America is the best place to be. Don't take my word for it. That's what other institutions, such as World Bank, they are saying. Compared to China, compared to Russia, compared to Europe, America is far better place to do business in terms of regulations. America also has what I call human capital advantages. After all, to grow an economy takes two things, right? It takes people and it takes capital. Now today, capital we can, borrow. If we need capital, we can borrow from Japan, we can borrow from China, which we are today. But human capital that is much more difficult to move around for lots of reasons. One of the main negatives that we face around the world right now, when you talk about human capital, that is the aging of America, aging of the world. We're all getting older, the so-called the gray of America, right? But did you know that relatively we are far better off? Well, by year 2050, statisticians they point out that in the United States, the average age by 2015 will be about 40 in the United States. In China it will be 49, and Japan will be 52. 52 as opposed to 40. Now, one of the reasons why we're not getting as gray as fast as, say, Japan is because of obviously, the Latin American population, where the population grows much more rapidly than birth rate is much higher than it is for the rest of the country. But again, the point is that, to grow the economy, we need people. Well, relatively we are better off, but that is not saying much. And so many countries, they're talking about what can we do to boost our labor productivity, to get more labor. Well, essentially, there are two ways of doing that. Number one is immigration. And so when you have immigration, not just for low-paying jobs, but for all kinds of jobs, immigration, obviously, that's one of the ways that you can solve this labor shortage problems. In Japan, for example, in Korea, they don't like immigration. These are very homogeneous populations, and then they do not accept foreigners very easily. And that's one of the reasons why, if you look at Japan, the average age, or they're graying at a much faster rate than other nations. As I said, Japan has a worse problem. They have a very low fertility rate, and again, by 2050, the average age of the age of the working population will be 52, which is too high. Immigration. And the other one is they're trying to get more women to join the labor force. This is especially true in a country like China, for example. See? As you know, because of the one-child policy, labor force growth in China is slowing down very, very rapidly. You know, I went to Beijing, China because we opened the store in Beijing, China at Forever 21. I went into the store and then I saw a lot of these young people buying, stuff. And when you go to Zara or Forever 21 in the United States, a lot of teenagers go there because they are inexpensive, right? They think they are getting good value, which they are. Now, it might be cheap for the US teenagers, but when you go to China, well, we're charging basically the same price. For the Chinese, it is very, very expensive because their per capita income is like a tenth of what we have in the United States. So I asked the store manager, how are these young kids, buying this stuff? Because, based on their per capita income, these are very, very expensive. And they said, well, don't worry about it. These teenagers, they have a lot of money. Why? The reason is because of one-child policy. Well, they got 6 adults, 2 parents, 2 sets of grandparents, 6 adults trying to spoil this kid. See? So they have all kinds of money. See? And that's one of the results of so-called one-child policy. So recently, as you know, the Chinese government, they had realized that, and Mr. Xi Jinping, he said, you know what, we are going to relax this one-child policy. We are going to ask Chinese women, Chinese families to have more children to help our economy. They are going to relax that. I guess the interesting question is, even if they relax that, will they? Well, not necessarily. If you go to Taiwan, if you go to Hong Kong, if you go to Singapore, those are other Chinese countries, right? Well, their income is high, the level of education is not high, their fertility rate is no higher than it is in the United States, or for that matter, in Korea. See? And simply because the government relaxes their regulation about one-child policy does not mean that the Chinese women in China will have more children. Again, as I said, that is not the case in Hong Kong, that is not the case in Taiwan. Again, but the point is that these are a couple of the ways of attacking these problems, immigration, and trying to get more women to work. Again, I'm talking about the human capital advantages, and the other one is, of course, education. If you look at the top 50 universities in the United States, you know that 29 in the United States, 29. In the United Kingdom, 7, China 1, Germany 1, Korea 1. Again, there's no comparison. We do a lot more research in the United States at these research universities. And also, the next thing I want to talk about is so-called the Wimbledon effect. In England, there's a tennis tournament called the Wimbledon, right? And that is known as the Wimbledon. So let me explain what that Wimbledon effect is. Every year they have this tennis match. Now this was, in 2013 was an exception, but almost never a British guy, or man or woman, they win the championship. It's always a foreigner winning the championship, right? So are the British upset? No, that's not the point. The point is not the fact that, not so much that the British they win or lose the match. The important thing is that the match is taking place in Wimbledon, England. See? They get all the publicity. They get all the foreign talents come into England and then they get publicity. Now, same thing is happening in Silicon Valley. If you look at Silicon Valley, about 30% of all the talents are there from overseas. India, China, Korea, and elsewhere. If you go to Wall Street, if you go to financial district of London, over 30% of all the talents there are coming from overseas. When you talk about Silicon Valley, New York City, and London, what I'm saying is that what's important is not the fact that these are the Americans or the British, but the fact that you gather talents from overseas and then get them to work in Silicon Valley, in New York City, in London. See, that's what's important. And that is known as the Wimbledon effect. We have the Wimbledon effect in America. Whereas Japan, for example, and then many European countries, Wimbledon effect is not as significant. So I think that is very, very significant. The last one I want to mention is what I call the, our boundaries. If you look at Korea, Japan, and China, historically they've fought each other, they killed each other, had many wars. If you go to Europe, between the Germans and Polish and French, they've had many wars, they fought each other, etc. Right? See? If you look at the United States, well, on the left-hand side, we got the Pacific Ocean. On the right-hand side, we got the Atlantic Ocean, right? It's just too big for anybody to come at us. Maybe North Korea, they try to do that, but hopefully they can't do that, see? And if you look at our neighbors, Canada and then Mexico, what? We are pretty friendly with them, right? See? So that we don't have to worry about, fighting with our neighbors. And, that is an important advantage to us. See? Again, I can go on and on and on, but again, the point I'm trying to make is that really, when you look at the long-term economic outlook, and as well as the short-term economic outlook, not only am I reasonably optimistic about the economy and the stock market in 2014, I'm also optimistic about especially the U.S. economy in the long run. Having said that, let me just conclude by pointing this out. We always tend to be optimistic. We want to be optimistic. We should be optimistic. Why? Because we are in business, right? And so we have to approach things with positive thinking. I certainly try to do that. But also, I think it is good to look back and see what we have done. Ever since the financial crisis in 2008, every single year we were overly optimistic, see? Okay. And economic growth in the stock market, even though they've done reasonably well, it fell below our expectations. Well, I hope that is not the case in 2014, but I think it is important to put that in historical context. There will be some headwinds. There will be some nasty surprises that you and I have not thought about today. So think about that. Thank you very much.
We've got a few minutes for some questions, if there are any.
Yeah, go ahead. It's gentleman way in the back. Yeah.
I was just wondering what comments you might have on California economy.
The question is California's economy. The California's economy during the downturn suffered more than the U.S. Many important reasons, but a couple of primary reasons were: number one, real estate. We had a lot more real estate focused, and then number two, the state government got in deep trouble, as you know, so they had to lay off a lot of people. And today, we are actually growing faster than the U.S. average, again, in part because of real estate is coming back faster, and then number two, the state government finally got more tax revenues and then cut back spending, so we are beginning to hire people and spend more money. And as an employee of the state university, I'm certainly very, very happy about that. But I think that California, I think, will continue to do well into the future. When we look at Ventura County that we are in, I'm also hoping that we will fare better than not only the United States, but hopefully as well as the California. And obviously, Ventura County, I know you didn't ask about Ventura County, but this is not really the manufacturing capital of the United States. But we are, for example, seeing a lot of the tourism doing very nicely. If you look at hotel and motel vacancy rates, they are very low. Why? Because many people from LA, they decided that I'm not going to Florida, Hawaii. I'm going to vacation nearby. Why? Because if I go to Ventura County, it's closer and then cheaper. And then, so we are seeing a lot of the tourists coming from surrounding communities. In Southern California, also IT, that is very important, technology. As I mentioned, the pie is not growing. And one of the ways that you can win is by getting a bigger market share. How do you get a bigger market share? Raise productivity, cut costs, and the best way to do that is employ technology. And then we have a fair amount of technology in Ventura County. So, these are some of the optimistic things that I'm talking about. In terms of, again, the business spending, wages are, on average, going up, not going down. Wages are going up. And that's in part because productivity is going up, and then therefore corporations can afford to pay higher wages than they are. And also, they are hiring people. Many small businesses are hiring people. And again, these are showing up in statistics. I'm not making up the numbers, but so businesses are really hiring more people. That's why total number of employment they're going up. So when you put them all together, it is not the most exciting picture that you want to have, but still it is moving in the right direction. Okay.